new baby.
There's anything I don't have a specific answer to, I'm happy to write to the Commission.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on a few lines in your submission, which is that it is crucial that the medical school such an important part of the character of the areas accommodated and provided with new improved facilities that will help the Imperial College to continue to train some of the country's best doctors. But I'm thinking from the view of Hammersmith, and also having been a junior doctor in Hammersmith, and also did my final exams at that building in Charing Cross, which is meant to be falling down. From a Hammersmith view, obviously, it was painful to see the Kennedy unit go to Oxford. I mean, one of I thought a unit which would have made the name of Hammersmith to be heard throughout the world. And I just wondered if, as you say, the facilities are to be withdrawn. I can't see any medical students particularly getting adequate training on the Charing Cross site, especially if the non-NHS buildings you mentioned are to go. And moreover, being again a GP who was trained in the Charing Cross Vocational Training Scheme, any GP wanting to be trained, or being able to be trained at Charing Cross. And of course it's how I came to be in Hounslow, as it so happens, because I trained at the Charing Cross scheme, and young doctors tend to stay where they train. That's what my own daughter has in Manchester. So I wondered how, my first point was referring to that, and that's what you say. The other thing is you mentioned that it was sad to lose the hyperacute stroke Hounslow, I should say, to St Mary's, but you understood it because, as we've been told, it had to be in a trauma unit. But isn't the Hounslow, which is very much a Charing Cross thing, by the way, was being thought of and acted on 30 years ago, goes to St Mary's, where there is a trauma unit, but it's only half a mile down the road from UCH, where there's another Hounslow with no trauma unit. How do you explain that from the view of or how do you cope with that from the view of a Hammersmith councillor?
Firstly, I have a clear interest. I study medicine in Imperial. The reason why I live where I live, and the reason why I spent growing my family in this area is because I went to the medical school in Imperial. So it isn't, obviously it's very close to my heart. I'm going to touch on the stroke unit first and then come back to that. The clinical arguments for whether a stroke unit is co-located with a trauma unit and the other hyper-dependency facilities is something that I'm not qualified enough to give an expert's opinion on that. That's a question for clinicians and for the NHS. However, I can understand the logic, and I'm sure you can understand the logic behind it. The questions from the UCH and that part of London, that's something that they have to answer. And whether they will change their services, I don't know. However, as I believe it, the changes relating to the stroke unit, when they were first established, it was always, in my understanding, envisaged that the stroke unit would ultimately end up at St Mary's. So I don't think it's an integral part of the Shaping a Healthier Future proposals. From my understanding is that was part of the original proposals with regards to the hyperacute stroke unit, which has been so incredibly successful in saving lives and reducing disability. Coming back to the training of doctors at Imperial and this part of London. Obviously, Imperial College Faculty of Medicine is extremely important for training world-class doctors, and its kind of operations are not just restricted to North West London, nor are they just restricted to the Imperial College NHS Trust. They have major sites across North West London and beyond. They send people to all the hospitals in North West London. They send them to Kingston. I even was sent to Boston, Lincolnshire on one rotation. So that their reach is extremely wide. However, there is clearly a demand, especially at the junior end of medical school, for there to be a site for the medical school, whether it's at Charing Cross, or whether Imperial uses some of its facilities at South Kensington, or whether it uses some of its facilities at the Hammersmith and other parts of this borough, for lecture theatres, for dissection labs, for those non-clinical aspects of medical training. That's obviously something that has to be considered. And I think you rightly address the clinical aspects of ward rotations and gaining experience clinically, training GPs, training junior doctors, and ultimately training consultants. So I think there is a big question over healthcare and education, but that's something that only the Faculty of Medicine and NHS Trust and the wider people who organise medical training can answer.
Yes.